Hey guys, my name is Rachel and welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be a little bit different than most of the videos I do here on my channel. Normally in my videos, we discuss cases of people who go missing and are never found again. However, in today's video, we are going to be discussing a very interesting case brought to my attention by one of you guys who suggested it to me through my email about a young woman who went missing and actually reappeared weeks later. Now, obviously that sounds like a very triumphant case where someone goes missing and is later found, but with this case, there is a little bit of controversy surrounding the details of her disappearance and how everything actually went down. With that being said, let's just get right into the case. Today, we are going to be talking about the case of Sherri Papini. 34-year-old Sherri Papini seemed to have a relatively normal and happy life. She was a fit and attractive woman who lived in a pretty nice house in Redding, California. She had 2 children, ages 2 and 4, with her husband, Keith Papini. She was well liked by those around her, and people even described her as being a super mom. Everything in her life seemed to be pretty normal and going pretty well. Sheri had made it a habit of going out jogging in the woods near her home, and November 2nd, 2016 was no different. Keith went to his job at Best Buy that morning, and Sheri went out on her jog as normal around 11 a.m. after telling her husband that she would be picking up the children from daycare a little bit later than usual. However, that day she never made it to pick up her children from daycare and wouldn't be seen again for 3 weeks. Now, at around 5:50 p.m. that evening, Keith got home from work only to find that his wife was nowhere to be found and his children had never been picked up from daycare. Of course, this put him into an immediate panic, and the first thing he thought to do was to use the app on his phone called Find My iPhone and try to track Sheri's phone down and hopefully find her. He was able to track down her phone pretty quickly, but she was not with it. He found Sheri's phone laying in the dirt along the trail that she was known to run on every day about a mile away from their house. At the scene, he also found her earbuds and noticed a few strands of blonde hair on the ground, but there was absolutely no sign of Sheri anywhere. By 7:50 that evening, Keith called police to report her missing. Immediately, they started to search for Sheri. They started handing out flyers, searching around the areas, and they even put out a $50,000 reward raised by her family and an anonymous donor for Sheri's safe return. However, despite their efforts, they just could not find her anywhere. Now, by November 7th, police administered a polygraph test on Keith and he passed. They also confirmed his whereabouts around the time that she went missing, and of course, he was at work, and they found him not to be a suspect, although they never truly took him out of their mind, just, as a precaution. But the entire time, he was extremely cooperative with police and just wanted to do whatever he could to help find his missing wife. On November 10th, Keith went to People magazine to talk about her disappearance and begged for whoever took her to bring Sheri home safely. He was adamant that they were dealing with an abduction. In a quote, he said, "She is my wife, and I know everything about her. I know that my wife would never leave me and never in a million years leave our kids." Throughout the search, police filed about 20 different search warrants, reviewed surveillance footage gathered from homes and other businesses around the area. They sifted through mountains of cell phone data, but this entire time, they had no real leads. They set out and asked the public for tips, and they received a bunch of tips, but nothing actually really led to anything. Keith was getting frustrated, rightfully so, about how the investigation was going. The case was leading nowhere, and normally with cases like this, time is of the essence, and the fact that weeks were passing without finding her must have been incredibly frustrating and heart-wrenching. Because of the lack of movement in her case by the police department, Keith actually set up a GoFundMe page to try and raise money for his own private investigators. Now, I do want to mention that I'm not exactly sure if he ended up being able to get the private investigators, if he ended up raising enough money. I didn't see in any sources that he actually had hired any, just that he was trying to raise money to get them. So I did just want to put that out there. At this point, the family was just going on the media and begging for her safe return. They were getting frustrated and starting to lose hope until 4:30 a.m. Thanksgiving Day on November 24th, 2016, 22 days after she went missing, when someone driving by spotted a woman on the side of the road along County Road 17 near Interstate 5 in Yolo County, about 150 miles away from Sheri's home in Redding. Of course, this woman was Sheri. Now, she was alive, but she was not in great condition when she was found. She had cuffs on her wrists and a chain around her waist. She had bruises everywhere, a broken nose, had something branded to her shoulder, and weighed only 87 pounds. Her long blonde hair had been chopped to shoulder length, very choppy, and she clearly looked malnourished. She clearly had been through something traumatic. The woman who found Sheri claimed that when she was driving by, she saw this woman looking absolutely terrified and waving her arms, holding a piece of fabric, trying to wave someone down. She said that this woman was in obvious need of help, so that's exactly what she did. But when detectives first questioned Sheri, she basically couldn't remember anything about the abduction and really had no answers. But after a while, she did come to her senses and was able to kind of remember what happened. Now, when she first told the story of how she was taken, she said that there were two Hispanic women, one with straight hair and one with curly hair, who covered their faces and drove a dark SUV and had thrown a bag over her head while she was jogging and then shoved her into their car. They then drove away and took her to an unknown location and physically shoved her out of the car while driving and then held her captive in a room in an unknown location. She said that the day she was found, she heard the two women arguing from the room that she was being held captive in, so she couldn't really see anything. But then she heard a shot go off, and then one of the women took her from the room and then dropped her off on the side of the road. Sheri didn't really have any idea why they let her go, and I didn't see anywhere in my research about whether they were speaking English or maybe they were speaking Spanish, so that's why she had no idea. But she didn't say what they were arguing about, just that they were arguing. But either way, she still was not able to say what the women's faces looked like and didn't know exactly what kind of car she was in and had no idea where she had been held. She said that she wasn't really able to get a good look at either of the women's faces, so she wasn't really able to give enough details to come up with a composite sketch. The only thing that she could really say about them was that one was probably between the ages of 20 and 30 with pierced ears, thin eyebrows, and curly black hair with a Spanish accent that was pretty thick, while the other captor was between 40 and 50 years old with thick eyebrows and straight black hair. They tried their best to come up with a sketch, but obviously had more so of just a general idea of what they could have looked like and threw something together based on that. She had also mentioned that during her time being held captive, she got into a physical altercation with one of the captors that resulted in a cut on her foot and her being knocked unconscious. She said that she was fighting back to be released, but of course they overpowered her, and that's how she ended up with a cut on her foot. But there was no sign of any sort of cuts or scars on either of her feet. So some people just kind of chalked it up to her misremembering since she had been through something so traumatic. But either way, it was just kind of this random thing that seemed to be a little bit off about her story. This is when investigators realized that a lot of the things Sheri was saying actually were just not adding up. So investigators took DNA samples off of Sheri, and they actually came back to belong to a woman and a man, not two women. They ran the DNA through a database and they couldn't get a match, so they didn't know who it was, but they knew that it was a man and a woman. Like I said, not two women. The only thing they really got from this DNA was that it didn't match her husband, but also that it didn't match her story of being abducted by two women. Now, the next strange thing in their case that investigators thought was a little bit sketchy is the fact that her alleged kidnappers just decided to let her go. In a quote from Ken Ryan, one of the investigators on her case, He said, "In my 25 years, I've never seen a case like this where someone gets kidnapped, held captive for 20-something days, and then just released. None of it makes sense." For quite a while after this, the case was pretty much at a standstill. They couldn't find who abducted her. They couldn't confirm any of the things that she was saying in her story. However, leads did keep coming up, and one that was especially interesting was released by investigators in 2017. Apparently, Sheri had been talking back and forth with this man in Michigan around the time before her disappearance, who she'd actually been planning on meeting up with right before she went missing. They hadn't said what other kind of messages were between the two, so we don't know if it was like a friendly type of thing or something more, but this was a very interesting bit of information. However, they did question him, and they compared his DNA to the male DNA found on Sheri, and was actually dismissed as a suspect altogether. So while this was an extremely interesting development in the case and could possibly be connected somehow other than him actually being responsible, we know that he probably wasn't the one responsible for actually taking her and holding her captive. Now, another interesting bit of information that came out a while later, which I do not think is super important to the case, but I do want to mention it, is just that Sheri may have been dealing with some sort of mental health issues around the time of her disappearance. She had also been accused of misleading police in 2003 in a different incident. Again, obviously, this isn't something that is completely groundbreaking in the case. A lot of us deal with mental health issues, and a lot of people have very minor things in their past that don't represent who they are now, but I just thought I would mention it. Again, obviously, a incident that happened over a decade ago where she was misleading police, and very vague details about some sort of mental health issues don't really say much about her or the case, but again, some sources mentioned it, so I just thought I'd throw it out there. What really got people is just the entirety of these weird inconsistencies in her story and other little tidbits that just don't really add up and make this story seem just a little bit strange. Some people think that Sheri knows a lot more than what she's letting on, or maybe that she's just making this entire thing up. Another thing that sketches people out a little bit about this case is how slow the investigation seems to have gone. The information that I mentioned earlier about Sheri talking to some guy in Michigan didn't come out until about a year after it was discovered. Why? There's been hundreds of tips and leads and information that just haven't been released by police. We also know that Sheri isn't really the most willing to discuss what happened to her. She won't really do any interviews and hasn't come out to talk about what happened to her since it happened. I don't even know if she really did any interviews other than with police. She's really just been trying to stay out of the spotlight and stay in the shadows, which again isn't necessarily pointing to her doing something sketchy, but it's just a little bit strange when you think about everything else in the case and how many things just kind of seem weird. So that's pretty much all the information that we have on this case. Of course, this is such a unique case because we know she was missing. We know she was found, but we don't really know exactly what happened. They have never found out who's responsible, and there are a lot of strange things about her story. There are so many things that we don't know about the case, like where she was even taken to, or what really even happened during the 3 weeks that she was being held captive. So that leads me to the main theories of what people believe may be going on with this case. So obviously, as you've probably gathered by now, a lot of people think that Sheri is making this entire thing up. But within this theory, you have to ask why. Why would this woman, who seemed to have a relatively happy and fulfilling life, just decide to pull this giant hoax? Some people believe that one day she just decided to skip town and start a new life, only to realize what she was doing had a change in heart and then decided to come back. Then obviously decided to stage this entire kidnapping so that her family wouldn't question why she decided to leave and obviously would accept her back with open arms. So we don't know a lot about her actual home life or her mental state, so I could see see how this could be a very plausible theory. Even though on the surface it may have seemed like she had it all together, had the perfect life and the perfect family with adorable children and a great husband, we don't actually know what's going on in her head or at home behind closed doors. Now, I don't want to throw accusations out there. This is all just speculation, but it's very possible that she could have been in some sort of bad situation, whether it be due to some sort of negative mental state or due to reasons in her life that we just don't know about. And maybe she was so desperate to leave that she just left. But then obviously after leaving decided that she really did just need to get back to her family, and she didn't make the right decision by leaving, so she orchestrated this entire thing so that no one would question anything. So there are other theories within the theory of her staging this entire thing. Some people think that maybe she staged this entire thing, maybe even with the knowledge of her husband, for some sort of monetary gain. Again, we know that there was a $50,000 reward set out pretty much immediately after she went missing, set up with her family and some mystery donor. We don't know who this mystery donor is or why they decided to donate such a large sum of money. So I guess it's possible that she had this plan set up so that her family could just receive this money, if that makes sense. So maybe just that like they would pay this money to some kidnapper when really there was no kidnapper and it was just her. So that's kind of what I mean by setting up this entire thing and then maybe just wanting to take the $50,000. But then at the same time within this theory, I wonder why she wouldn't have just set up some sort of ransom. I think it would be a lot easier to come up with the money to pay her directly by a ransom note if that's really what she wanted to do by staging this entire thing. In my opinion, just with the facts that we know, it's pretty difficult to maybe set up a reward that you don't necessarily know is actually going to be set up for your safe return. I personally think that it would have been easier just to use a ransom note because she didn't necessarily know that this $50,000 reward would be set up right away. She didn't know that people would have the money to raise it unless there was some sort of imminent danger to actually getting the money. Unless this mystery donor, we don't know who it is, maybe they know who it is, or maybe they figured out some other way, but I just think it would have been easier for her to receive the money directly from a ransom note than setting up this reward and hoping that they get it. So in my opinion, just with the facts that we know, I don't personally think that it's very likely that if she did stage this, that it was for a monetary gain. Again, we don't have a lot of information on a lot of the details in this case, but I would imagine that she didn't receive any of the reward money, but we don't know for sure. I assume she probably didn't because no one necessarily found her, and if anyone got the money, it probably would have been the woman driving by. I don't even know if she got any of the reward money, but either way, I just don't think that someone setting up their own disappearance would set it up that way without a ransom note if they were trying to make money. Another theory within this theory of her staging the entire thing, which I'm just going to kind of breeze over because it was mentioned in a lot of different forums that I read, but I don't necessarily think that it's very likely. But the next theory is that she possibly did have such a severe mental issue that she made this entire thing up, and maybe she even really thinks that it happened. Maybe she was in a mental state that caused her to wander off and get lost somewhere, and then she just turned up weeks later. Maybe she didn't even mean to make this stuff up, but her mental state kind of caused that to happen. Maybe when she was wandering, something happened, and she just kind of thought that that's what happened while she was out in the woods, wherever lost. But again, I don't think that this theory is very likely because as far as I know, there hasn't been any further reports of her having any sort of ongoing mental illness. I feel like that's something that's pretty big that would have been mentioned if it was going on. I feel like if it were some sort of crazy mental break that caused her to wander off in some delusional state and then come up with this whole thing by accident, that it probably wouldn't have just stopped, like the mental issues wouldn't have just stopped and never caused her any problems again. Again, we don't know her personal life. She may be dealing with some sort of issues, maybe not, but we don't know. Again, I just wanted to put this theory out there because I saw some people talking about it, but I just don't think that this seems very likely, especially given what we know. So the last theory, of course, is that she really was abducted and then released for whatever reason. Now, I think this might be an unpopular opinion, and I think people might think I'm a little bit naive, but I do think that this is the most likely theory. Let's just talk about the facts that we do know. She was found incredibly malnourished and beat up. She had clear signs of trauma and was 150 miles away from her house. She didn't take her car with her to drive that far, and I haven't seen anything about her getting onto a bus or taking a cab. And I feel like if she did, those things would have come out. We would have known that. So those pretty much are the facts of how she was found and where she was found. We do know that there were inconsistencies with her story, but to me, the inconsistencies don't seem that dramatic. Just hear me out. You'd think that if someone was making this entire thing up and they wanted to add details just to fluff it up, that they would add some pretty crazy things, right? The thing with the cut on her foot, it's very possible that she was just misremembering. Same thing could be when she falsely identified the genders of her two captors. It's very easy to look at this case in a very stable mindset as someone who has never been through such an unspeakable trauma and think, how could they misremember something that serious, that obvious? Why would someone just make something up like that if this really did happen to them? But you have to remember that we have no idea what could possibly be going through her head. If she was starved and beaten for 3 weeks, it's very possible that she either imagined or hallucinated something or just flat out falsely remembered something. Think of how many things are happening through the entire 3 weeks that she was there. If she was really taken and she was being beaten, you have to imagine it was probably a lot and multiple times. So it's very easy for her to just maybe get something mixed up. Or maybe she thought she had a cut on her foot and really it was a bruise or something like that. She'd also mentioned that she had been knocked out in that altercation. So maybe she thought that she got a cut on her foot, but she just didn't. She could have even completely fabricated something in her head as a coping mechanism. Maybe she really thought that she tried to fight back and hurt her foot. Maybe that's what was getting her through this, knowing that she was fighting back. And maybe she really thought that one of her captors was a woman when really it was a man, maybe with long hair or a womanly stature or a womanly voice. Also, in my opinion, and again, this might be naive, but I just don't see how or why someone would go through such great lengths to make themselves look hurt. Especially if we go with the theory that she had a sudden change of heart after leaving her family. She would have had to starve herself for at least a week or two before coming out and making it look like she was so malnourished. She was also found with wounds in different stages of healing, which I don't know if I mentioned that again, but a lot of the wounds she had were in different stages of healing. So again, she would have had to have this plan for at least a few weeks to create those results in the first place. In my opinion, I just don't think that someone who is trying to make it look like something like this happened would harm themselves multiple times over multiple weeks, starve themselves just to make it look more realistic. I think that if someone really was trying to come up with something like this, make themselves look hurt, they probably would have done like one big thing to themselves, if that makes sense. They might have, found a way to injure their head or their arm or something. I don't think that most people would go through the process of doing it over and over and over again just to create that effect. So this might be an unpopular opinion, but I do think that she probably is a victim who went through the most traumatizing things someone can experience and simply misremembered things and just doesn't want to be in the spotlight. Again, we talked about how she doesn't want to do interviews. She doesn't want to talk about it. If she's traumatized, of course she's not going to want to talk about it. Of course she's not going to want to go on TV, especially if she went through something so horrific and people are looking at her and saying, this didn't really happen to you, or aren't believing her, or are harassing her for making this thing up. I could see why she wouldn't want to go in the public spotlight. It completely makes sense. After reading articles, some very opinionated articles, and some articles that just told the facts, That's just what I get from this. A lot of the articles I read were very, very biased to her making it up. And then some were just telling the straight facts, but I didn't see any that are like, I think she's a genuine victim. The whole thing, if you search her name, it's just questioning if she made it up or not. It's not telling her story. It's basically articles about did she make it up or not. But I will concede that there are some strange things about this case, even if I lean more towards it actually happening. Why would someone just randomly decide to take her? Was she a victim of opportunity or was she targeted? Why did they just decide to randomly let her go? Why has there been almost no leads in this case? And why do investigators seem to be dragging their feet? They haven't come up with a motive and they have no idea why she was taken. She doesn't even know why she was taken. I feel like at least that should be answered by now, but it's not. Why have the people who did this never been found? And why are there so many things in this case that just don't add up? I don't know, but either way, I do think that she very well could be a victim here who really was abducted for whatever reason and is just getting completely harassed in the spotlight from people just thinking that she made it up. Again, we don't know exactly what happened, but imagine going through something like this and maybe misremembering or telling something wrong, and then suddenly everyone thinks that you're making it up. That has to be the most frustrating thing that someone can go through. Just try and put yourself in her shoes and try and think about, what if this was you? What if you went through something so traumatic and no one believed you? It makes the entire situation even worse. And if she is just making this entire thing up, then that's a horrible thing to do, but I don't know. I just don't know. With the facts in this case, I just don't know what to think. So that's pretty much it for today's video. I know this was a little bit of a different video than normal, but it was really interesting to research and look into the different opinions and theories that everyone has in this case. So now I want to know what you guys think. Do you think that this entire thing was staged? If so, why? Or do you think that she's a genuine victim of kidnapping? And if so, why are there all of these weird inconsistencies? Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you liked this video, please make sure to leave me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. I put out new true crime and mystery videos every single week. Also, don't forget to follow my Twitter and Instagram. Both will be linked in the description box below. If you have absolutely any case suggestions that you'd like to see me cover on this channel, please do not hesitate to send over your suggestions to my email at RachelShannonCases@gmail.com. I read every single case suggestion that I get, and every video that I make are suggestions from you guys. So please don't be afraid to send your suggestion over. With that, I hope you guys have a great week, and I hope to see you next time. Bye.